Well, I'm excited to be here today talking about so many different topics, but primarily sugarcane, which, as most of you would probably agree, is the central ingredient to the making of rum. I actually believe water is an equally important ingredient, so I kind of balance my considerations for my own company between sugarcane and water. Um, but one of the things I learned early on is that I'm not very far from my sugarcane, even though my distillery is in Colorado and my sugarcane is in Louisiana. So many people from day one were saying, "Oh, so you're pretty far from your sugarcane." And I realized most rum distillers in this day and age who produce any sort of volume are pretty far from their sugarcane. So 1,200 miles actually seems kind of close. So I wanted to do a number of things today. I want to first talk about myself and a little bit and how I got into this business and where I come from and what my expertise is. I'd love to talk about my company, my rum company that's now 12 years old as of April of 2020. And I'd love to talk about sugarcane in general and sugarcane very much in specific to the craft spirits world, to US based makers. And then I'd also love to talk about sustainability because I run a B Corp. I'm the only B Corp certified rum distillery in the world. So I think a lot differently from many companies about sourcing and the importance of my sourcing relationships. My company is Montanya Distillers, and we are based at about 9,000 feet in the mountains of Colorado. I have 4 rums that are available in the marketplace, actually around the world. So I sell in most states in the United States, and then I also sell overseas quite a bit. So these are the 4 rums that I make. I only use ever in any of these 3 to 4 ingredients: sugarcane from the US, water from Colorado, yeast from the US, and in some 3 of the 4 of these, a tiny, tiny touch of honey from the bees around my distillery, literally 0.0036%. So it's not a sweetener. It brings out a lot of flavors from the distilling process in the barrel, and from the original sugar cane itself. So again, my plan for today is to talk about these areas, and I'll skip past this since I already talked about that. But this is where I'm located, in Crested Butte, Colorado. Crested Butte is a spectacular valley in the Rocky Mountains. You're looking here sort of northwest into the West Elk region of the Rockies. We pull our water from about 350 feet under our distillery. So out of an aquifer that has been filtered through natural stone. It's a pretty spectacular water source. For those of you in this business, you understand how important that is. I don't have to do any water filtration for fluoride or chlorine or anything because I don't pull my proofing water from the municipal water source. I actually pull it right straight from my own well that's under the facility. So Crested Butte, and then this is one of the 3 water sources that contributes to that aquifer. This is the Slate River. We have pretty spectacular mountain runoff. Every year we have generally a lot of very plentiful water, which is important. This is one of my 3 locations. So downtown in Crested Butte, I have a bar and a restaurant and a distilling operation. But this is not where I rack any barrels or do any bottling. So it's a great way to interact with the public, to let them see some of what we do, give them a tour, give them a tasting. We make a lot of rum in this building. But then we also have, and this is in that same building, this is 2 of our stills. These are original alembic copper pot stills from Portugal. They were handmade for us. They're from really one of the oldest traditions of distilling, fired by open flame, as opposed to a steam jacketed distilling operation. So these are only 100-gallon stills, which I have maxed out my capacity on these. And so this is my new alembic copper pot still 100% copper kettle, still a lentil, which is that circle that you see at the very top. Still an alembic head, all made of copper, double reflux. But unlike the other two stills, this is a 500-gallon still, steam jacketed, and produces, has helped us to keep up with production. So we just brought this still in, had it custom made in the United States by an amazing partnership out of Portland, Oregon called Bridgetown. And so I also have a bar and a restaurant in my facility. We do all rum all day long, rum cocktails only. We do a lot of live music. We do a lot of food. We have a chef. It's a pretty fun little spot. And this is one of my other locations, which is our rack house, our bottling line. We use all American white oak barrels primarily, and then we have some finishing barrels that are French oak. And so these are kind of some of the main things to know about our company. We're always 100% pot distilled. When I say low ester, which I believe that the concept of ester will be coming up quite a bit, I'm referring specifically to the types of esters that people have begun, much to my pleasure, to understand and to associate with Jamaican styles or funky styles of rum that are really gaining in popularity. I personally love them so much. But most of those esters that they describe as kind of pineapple flavors, banana flavors, a lot of fruity elements, I don't produce those types of esters at 9,000 feet in Colorado. So my esters are different. I do produce esters and I do produce congeners that are tend to be a little bit more on the bitter side, actually, which I love in our rum. So we are not a sweet rum, as you, I'm sure, can imagine. But we also tend to have some qualities of almost like a Italian Amaro, some of the European and Mediterranean spirits that are out there. And I believe that that comes from distilling on copper at the elevations that we're at. Every drop of rum that I make is oak aged, nothing less than 1 year. Some of my rums are aged upwards of 4 and 5 years. We're single bottle, no blends. And all of our sugarcane is American farmed. We work directly with our farmers. As I mentioned, the mountain spring water. We use very craft methods, and some people disagree about exactly what that means. But when I say that, what I mean is that all of our process is handled by human beings. We don't have computers operating, making decisions about cuts, making decisions about measuring ABV or measuring temperatures or anything like that. It's all human scale, human operated, nothing artificial, no additives, no caramel sweeteners, other than the tiny, tiny touch of honey that I mentioned, which isn't present in our Valentia. And then our company is female founded, female owned, which you can imagine 12 years ago, that was quite a thing. So to talk about my history in the rum world, I started this company 12 years ago. I have a Master of Science degree from the University of Colorado. I have, over the period of this 12 years, done every single job, every single aspect of owning and operating a distillery, from distilling, building fermentations, designing still, all of our equipment, choosing equipment, developing our formulas, creating our final spirits, deciding how we do filtration. I've been involved at every level of the distilling side. And then I've also run the company. So when we started, we were in an 800 square foot building with really a tiny operation to today where we have 3 buildings. We ship a lot of rum around the world, and we have a head count of about 30 employees. And so, yeah, I guess what I bring to this conversation about sugarcane, about rum, is that I have had to make 1,000 decisions over the last 12 years about everything that I do. And I have found that it's been really an exceptional process. I've learned so much. I'm pretty humble about what I know and don't know. But it's really been incredible to watch rum come up in the world of spirits and to begin to have its time. And it's also really amazing to watch craft cocktails come up and begin to have their time. You can imagine 12 years ago, there just weren't even really craft cocktails happening. There were some pretty bad ones out there. It was very much the beginning of that. It was also really the beginning of craft distilling in Colorado. There were only, I think I'm the 5th craft distiller to come online in Colorado. There are now, I don't know, I should have checked before this, 150 distilleries in Colorado, and so many people who've come up through this, and many of those are rum focused. So it's been really fun to be part of educating, helping people to understand the American rum tradition and claim our place and our voice in that. I'm also, as I said, a certified B Corp. So my commitment to environmental and social responsibility not only is very important, but it's deeply, deeply embedded in every single thing we do as a company. We work so hard to assess every decision we make, everything we buy, everything we sell, every building we occupy, to make it as environmentally responsible and as socially responsible as possible. Nothing like a pandemic to help me to realize that my company's always been more about the people than it has even been about the rum. So we've been really working hard to be good stewards of our responsibilities through the pandemic. And that's a whole other seminar, as you can imagine. But we only buy cradle to cradle certified glass. We have so many elements of the company that, we look at. So we can talk again. I've taught at ADI some sessions on sustainability, and I hope to get an opportunity to do that again. We are also 60% women, which is, as many of you listening to this will self-assess and understand from what you've seen, what you do, what you know, it's still incredibly rare in the world of distilling. Based on my assessment of what I have been able to glean from the data, women represent 7% or less of ownership and direct operation of craft distilleries in the US. It's still a really small number, although it's grown exponentially, I think, since I started. So we are starting to begin to take our place in the world of distilling and to be taken very seriously, which I'm thankful for and proud of playing a part in. And then again, we do everything by hand ourselves. We don't source any rum. We don't work with any blending houses. We do every single aspect of the process ourselves in Colorado. And then moving on to sugarcane, which is really the topic of the day. This is my sugarcane, one of my sugarcane fields in Louisiana. So this is in Belle Rose. It's about 90 kilometers outside of New Orleans. There's a lot to say about the Lula co-op that I work with in Louisiana, and I'm gonna go a little bit deeper on that. But I think suffice it to say for this moment that my farmer co-op is about 50 square miles. It's right near Lake Pontchartrain. It is, yes, a constant monoculture crop, meaning that that's all they grow in this bottomland is sugarcane. But that's attributable to two things. One is that they learned a long time ago that not a whole lot else grows very well in this bottomland other than sugarcane. This is the northernmost latitude of sugarcane on the planet Earth. So it's the closest physically to me that I can buy. And the company is, they grow non-GMO sugarcane, which makes sense because you can't grow anything but non-GMO sugarcane in the US. And their mill is 100% biomass operated. So they have the same commitment to many of the environmental principles that I have. This is, of course, a Saccharum officinarum, which is the most typical sugarcane that is grown for commercial purposes around the world. But I'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a minute. I have a very strong relationship with these farmers. So they send me photos all the time, like looking out at their machinery. They are a small scale operation, but they machine harvest everything. So there are no human beings out in fields with threshing going on. It's a very responsible way of harvesting sugarcane compared to a lot of places in the world where it's all done by humans. Part of the reason that can be possible is because it's flat. So these multi-million-dollar sugarcane harvesting machines can really only operate on flat ground. So if I were in, on a mountainous, hilly island in the Caribbean, like St. Lucia or something like that, and I was trying to use a sugarcane harvesting machine, I would have a heck of a time. So this isn't suited to every climate, to every geography in the world of sugarcane growing. But it does create a situation where I can feel good about it. And I'm going to talk about the human component of sugarcane in a minute. This is how I receive it partly. So I'm going to walk you through how sugarcane is typically handled in the rum world, and all the different ways in which people take their sugarcane products. But for me, I take two finished goods. I take molasses and I take raw crystallized sugarcane. It's not sugar like you would ever be able to buy on your table. It's never gone to the refinery. It's never been treated with flocculants, etc. So I take it in these huge, these are called super sacks. I buy many tons of this and in each load so that I get real efficiency in the freight. Not everybody making rum out there is going to need 4 tons of super sacks of raw cane. But I think that is the first decision any rum distiller makes is, what am I going to make my rum from? 90% of rums are made from molasses. I find that the rums I love most in the world are either made from the full spectrum of the sugarcane plant. So the raw sugarcane juice, which is more like the French agricole styles, I love. And then I also love raw cane rums, which are, many of them come from Central and South America. Maybe they have been heated one time, maybe they've been boiled to be turned into a different product, but they are made from everything that came out of the sugarcane plant. So I also make my rum from everything that came out of the sugarcane plant. But I also get rid of the bagasse, which is the fibrous solids of the cane, the grassy components, and I get rid of the water, because there's no point for me in shipping water from Louisiana to Crested Butte, Colorado. It's just gonna take up space and be expensive, and I've got lots of good water. So I work very closely with this mill. I go on a regular basis to visit, to make sure that they are following the same procedures and protocols that I feel are important, that we're getting the first press of the cane instead of all 6 presses. So when they press sugarcane commercially to produce molasses, to produce sugar in general. Usually the stalks of sugarcane go through 6 times through the presses to bring out the juice. At the 6th press, you get more of the grassy notes, more of what we would associate with an agricole style. I personally, excuse me, I feel like that is more of a Caribbean tradition personally. And I'm more of a mountain tradition of rum. So I take the first press of the cane, which is more like the extra virgin olive oil of sugarcane. Extra virgin olive oil is the first press of the olive. That's where a certain set of flavors are expressed. Then when you keep pressing the olive, you get the lighter, less robust flavors. And so I work closely with my sugarcane mill to be able to select exactly the profile of the sugarcane that I want. This is not the best picture, unfortunately, because my camera was not in great focus when I took this, but I think it's an important image of what I am doing with my sugarcane and what any producer that makes from molasses or raw sugar would be doing. So you heat the sugarcane in a boiler, and then it becomes a liquid that looks a lot like this. This is in one of the tanks in which they are beginning to crystallize the sugarcane. So it's beautiful. It's so flavorful. It's, you can dip your finger in here. It's got all the molasses and everything that's going to come out of there at the end of the process is right there in this tank. And then they put it under high, intense vacuum pressure. And under that vacuum pressure, they introduce a little bit of the crystals that were from the last batch. So it's a little like making yogurt, you can imagine. You introduce a little bit of crystallized sugarcane, and it teaches the new liquid, warm sugarcane how to crystallize. And they do that under vacuum pressure. In my mill, that process is only done by a group of Hondurans who are specialists. They come every year at a certain time of the harvest, and they manage the crystallization process. That is, I believe, true all over the sugarcane world, not necessarily Hondurans, but certain specialists who know this process and do it in a way that is exceptional. And if they screw it up, you can imagine that the consequences are pretty intense. So I'm really grateful for them. And I've been kind of watching right now because our sugarcane harvest begins in August. Typically those Hondurans arrive in August, and I don't know what it's going to look like in the age of coronavirus if all those partnerships are going to work. So cross your fingers. Also, the harvesting process is done in part by a migrant labor force. And so I'm concerned and watching closely to see what happens. These, migrant workers move between sugarcane fields, and they work multiple farms in the height of the harvest. So from here, from this tank under vacuum pressure, it goes into a centrifuge. And in the centrifuge is where you separate the molasses that was in the sugarcane from the crystals of raw sugar that are going to go kind of the other way. They're going to get separated. Many rum distillers only take that molasses, and then the rest of it goes off to be made into table sugar at the refinery. I personally, when I first got into this business, I didn't totally understand this process. And it was a real education for me to recognize that molasses wasn't something that was made from raw sugarcane juice. Molasses is in raw sugarcane juice. And so 12% of that liquid is extractable as molasses, roughly. It changes based on your bricks, based on your measurements of sweetness in your final sugarcane plant coming out of the field. And I think that changes based on where it's being grown, the conditions at harvest time, how hot it gets. They believe that the hotter the sugarcane gets at harvest time, the more bricks you get out of it, which is part of why they burn sugarcane in the fields in most parts of the world, not in my sugarcane fields in Louisiana. We're going to talk about that as well for a minute. So then once it comes out of the centrifuges, this is kind of one of the members of management in the crew. She's actually managing the incoming sugarcane, but a number of these managers are managing different stretches of the process so that they can make sure that the flow is happening correctly, that nothing gets stuck, nothing stops when you have a pretty sticky item like molasses. They then put my molasses into totes, big totes that come to me, and they put the raw cane into those super sacks, and it all gets shipped directly from this building to me in Crested Butte. So it never goes into the commodity market, never, I don't buy it through some third party or a secondary supplier. I buy direct from the farming co-op that grows and mills it. And these are some of the folks. So these are like 6th generation families in Louisiana that have been growing and milling sugarcane. So this is at Tales of the Cocktail, which many of you know, and Louisiana, everybody knows. But we get together at least, at Tales, more often, they often come to Crested Butte, so that we can talk about our relationship. It's been one of the most lovely and satisfying professional relationships in my life, because these folks are just salt of the earth. They really care about their community and their employees, and they take really good care of everybody and employ them often year round when they only work for 3 to 4 months of the year. They also had the hardest harvest ever in their history last year. So we're looking forward to, 2 years ago was their hardest harvest ever, and it went a full month longer than usual. So to talk kind of more generally about sugarcane, I think, many people have come to know and understand that there are many different types of sugarcane from around the world. The origin of sugarcane really goes back to, they believe, to the far, Eastern Asia part of the world. There are many different stories about where it originated, and I've just decided I'm not going to choose one origin story because I don't really know. None of us do, but there are many different types of sugarcane that started and grew in different parts of the world. The thing that differentiates them is the size of the stalk, the width of the stalk, how much juice is in the stalk, how many leaves the stalk has, how many, how much bricks it can produce during its growth and its development in the field. So Officinarum, as I said, is the one that you see most often in commercial production in Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Fiji. Barberry is the more common Indian version of sugarcane, and that is also grown commercially. India has become a much bigger producer. There's also, people choose different strains of sugarcane, different species of sugarcane based on pests that they're trying to eliminate, or what they're going to do with the sugarcane at the end of the process. So for the making of rum, Saccharum officinarum is by and large the one that you will find when you buy molasses, when you buy raw sugar, if you're down in the Caribbean and you see the fields full of sugarcane, those are typically officinarum. I remember that word by sort of imagining myself giving a little Harry Potter spell, because it sounds like one of those spells to me. It took a little while for me to remember all these different types of sugarcane. And then also with the you get strains. So different countries, different companies, different areas, then take the family, genus, and species of the sugarcane, and they create a strain of sugarcane. And in the United States, that's most often assigned a number, or a letter and a number combination. So it's important, I think, personally, to know not only what species of sugarcane you're buying, but also what strain of sugarcane you're buying. So in my growing world, they actually just started experimenting with a new strain. It's a little bit more robust. It's a little more resistant to the cane insects that like to eat it. One of the biggest ones that's out there is the cane borer, but I don't have as much of a problem with the cane borer. That's really a big deal in South America. But part of the reason they wanted to create, this is not a GMO thing, it's more like a hybrid or a cross like you would get with the growing of an apple. And part of the reason that they create these strains is to solve certain problems in various growing regions, and typically to create more and more sugar content coming out of every stalk, because that's where the money lies for them. So in my world, I'm always asking and always being very specific about which strain is being grown, what am I taking, and controlling that. But as sugarcane has come along, it's definitely changed a lot. That also brings up the question of GMO sugarcane. When I first started distilling rum, there was no such thing as GMO sugarcane. And everybody has different feelings about what GMO means, but there's really one thing we can all agree on, and that is that GMO is created primarily to have an agricultural product that is less vulnerable to pesticides. So you create crosses, you create DNA interactions within the sugarcane itself. Sometimes you introduce the DNA of a bug, a beetle, something that makes it more robust when interacting with bugs and beetles outside of its own skin. And so in the world of sugarcane, the reason GMO has come about really only since 2017 is so that crops can bear the use of more pesticides. And many people will say, no big deal, because the distilling process eliminates the pesticides from the final liquid. So we're not necessarily dealing with pesticides in our final liquid of our rums. However, for me as a B Corp, for me as a sustainable company, I have to think about the lives and the livelihoods of the people who are harvesting the sugarcane, who are living near the sugarcane fields, who are drinking the water that is flowing out of the sugarcane fields during a rainy season, and who are interacting with the air around a sugarcane field. So I care a lot about GMOs. The US has yet to approve GMO sugarcane to be grown in the US, but I feel like it's coming. It's just a matter of minutes. I have a deal with my family growers that they will not convert any of their crops to GMO without me knowing, at least. But down in Brazil, which is where most of the sugarcane for the rum trade comes from, they are converting, basically 33,000 hectares per planting into GMO crop, and they have been doing that since 2017. So thousands and thousands of hectares of crops being converted in Central and South America to GMO so that they can grow more, put more pesticides on it, have less loss to pests and to various different incursions that they're dealing with. So So these are some of the most common practices that you see in sugarcane. Obviously, we just talked through GMO. Monoculture, so sugarcane growing is almost always a monoculture crop because it takes 3 years to work through a single plant's lifespan. So first you plant, a little baby sugarcane plant in the field. It's, usually about yay big. Those are often started inside or started in a separate place. You plant that and it will mature in a single season. So they start to plant them in the fall, in the late fall, early winter, in most places. And then they harvest them in typically, depending on which hemisphere you're in, obviously, in the late summer. So August in the United States, it would be the opposite. So March in Brazil, below the equator. And so almost every sugarcane crop is a monoculture crop. And what that means, for those of you who aren't aware of that terminology, is just that there's nothing else growing in between to reintroduce nitrogen, to reintroduce the culture of the soil that is necessary for it to remain very strong and very conducive to growing over time. So in a monoculture environment, you have to add nitrogen, you have to add fertilizers, typically a lot of soil nutrients to allow that sugarcane to grow. The cool thing about my sugarcane is that because it grows in a bottomland near Lake Pontchartrain, every time Louisiana gets a big storm cycle, which it does almost every year, it's just a question of how big, Lake Pontchartrain will kind of run over its banks and bring all this incredibly nutritious soil into this bottomland. So even though I have a monoculture crop, it's not monoculture in the same way that it would be if it weren't getting all those nutrients from Lake Pontchartrain. And 50 years ago, that would have been a bad thing because Lake Pontchartrain was not being well cared for. It had pollution. It was a pretty terrible situation. But that has changed. The sugarcane growers are stewards of Lake Pontchartrain to make sure that that's not polluting their crops. But also, just in general, the Clean Water Act has made a big difference to the health and well-being of my particular sugarcane crop in making sure that Lake Pontchartrain is healthy. Most sugarcane in the world is human harvested. It really these days runs more like about 55 to 60% human harvested. Those harvesters are typically paid by the pound. So many of you know, and I won't name any names of actual rum brands, but many of you know that there's been a lot of media hype and a lot of problems with sugarcane harvesters having a much higher mortality rate than their fellow agricultural harvesters. And so that's partly because of climate change. They're working in circumstances where they're not getting enough shade, not getting enough hydration, working too long hours in too high temperatures. So in some cases, you're seeing increased mortality among sugarcane harvesters in other parts of the world other than the US, to the tune of between 12 and 24% higher mortality. And these are typically kidney failure type diseases that result from total system breakdown due to their working conditions. So that has become part of the media story about rum over the years, and I've worked really hard to help people differentiate between what some countries are doing and what the United States is doing for growing sugarcane. A lot of these places, they want to bring their sugarcane up to basically up to maturity all at once. And one of the ways to do that is just to drench it with Roundup or other types of glyphosate or other pesticides in general. I don't know exactly how it works, but I do know that It just simply causes every stalk of sugarcane in the field to kind of go, oh, it's time to, it's time to be done with our growing cycle. And so these are really common practices that can affect the communities around sugarcane growing regions. And then right at harvest time, they typically burn sugarcane in the field. Most sugarcane is burned in the field. Again, not my crops, but the reason they do that is if it's being human harvested, they want to burn off those stalks, all the leaves. They want to bring the bricks up as much as possible, which the heat does. They want to burn cobras and, spiders and just things that are going to really cause challenges to their harvesters. So they burn in the field. I think I have actually a picture of what that looks like. You can imagine that contributes a lot of air pollution to the communities around the sugar cane growing areas. And it also contributes a lot of particulate matter. So a lot of things that when you ingest them into your lungs can cause asthma, can cause breathing problems, just major issues. So just to finish off this slide, the air and the water around the mills is often heavily affected by the mill itself. So, and from the burning of the sugarcane. So in my mill, because it's in the US and it has to meet air quality standards of the Clean Air Act, it has the most strict environmental responsibility to return air to the sky cleaner than it came in. Same with their water. But that's not true in many of the growing regions for sugarcane. So you'll find water and air being released from the mills that is severely polluted. And that can have long-term effects on the communities around those growing regions. So this is just, to take all of that common practice in the world of sugarcane and apply it specifically to Montanya distillers and my rum. Like I said, no GMO, the monoculture has a seasonal revitalization cycle, machine harvesting instead of human harvesting, very limited pesticide use, typically plant-based pesticides if it is used. The technique my folks use much more often is a little mild ground burning. So it's not nearly what you saw in that slide, but they will do a little ground burning of the field before they plant the sugarcane. And that eliminates a lot of the pests out of the field that would go on to bother the baby plants when they plant them. Again, no cane burned in the field. The mill is operated 100% by biomass from the sugarcane. So the bagasse, which is those fibrous stalks that are in the cane, go back into the boilers and into producing electricity. So they're 100% producing all of their own electricity and all of their own heat in the mill. And that's relatively common around the world. But in many cases, actually, where you have a rum distillery that is not near its sugarcane, but is milling, you'll find that there's too much separation between the biomass and the milling. So that doesn't happen. Cleaner water is released at my mill than was brought in. Cleaner air is released than was brought in. The stewardship of Lake Pontchartrain. And then also, I love supporting a family-owned co-op. There are a number of families that I've, as you know, gotten to know, and they're helped, watch their kids get sent to college, gotten to know their management teams, and that to me is just part of being a good steward of a supply chain. Gosh, I think that was, those were the main things that I wanted to cover, except to talk a little bit about decision making in rum, you know, like why would you choose one source of sugarcane over another? I think first it tracks back to personal preference. I tend to love rums that are made from, as I said, the whole plant, instead of just the molasses. Molasses in fermentation, for those of you who have fermented it, will note that it produces a sulfur element, not necessarily a huge sulfur element in the craft distilling world, nothing compared to what's happening, say, in a large scale maker of sugar, of molasses, or user of molasses and fermenter of molasses. But it is, it's a very different flavor profile. People associate that molasses-based rum with a lot of the Caribbean styles. It produces the types of esters and congeners that we're used to in Caribbean styles of rum. And so, yeah, as much as I love those types of rum, I just don't think I can make them as well at 9,000 feet in Colorado. Then there are the producers that make it from all just the fresh pressed sugarcane juice. I can't do that because it will start to ferment before it gets to my distillery in Colorado. And to have fermenting sugarcane juice means I can't control the yeast, I can't control the culture in general, and it may taste radically different from batch to batch. And so then there are a lot of people out there who make rum from sugar. Sugar that they buy out of the commodity market, sugar they buy in 50-pound bags from, C&H or whatever. And that is also a different flavor profile. It doesn't have the molasses component. Much of that has gone through the stages of refining, flocculent tanks, which just are, all those are doing is trying to make every crystal of the sugarcane look the same. So that when you scoop out a little spoonful of sugar on your table, you look at it and you don't see impurities or imperfections. My raw cane, the granulated cane that I use, that's 88% of my fermentation, is it's so raw, and it has pieces of bagasse, and sometimes it has rocks in it, and we have to do a lot of physical filtering, not like a carbon filtration process, but a plate filtration process to pull those impurities out. But I love a lot of the flavors that come out of that when it's in its most raw state, as opposed to when it's been processed and refined a lot. There's no benefit to a rum distiller from that refining process. You actually lose a lot of flavor, and you all the things that make it really uniform, you're just gonna get rid of when you put it in a wash tank. So there's no major purpose to the refining process, and it's a lot of expended energy that's unnecessary to rum. So I personally feel like it's crazy as a rum maker to pull post-refined rum out of the commodity market, because you've lost a lot. But for some rum makers, that's the only place they can get it. It's the easiest place to get it. Maybe rum is not their number one gig. They're mostly a whiskey maker, but they're producing a rum and they don't want to have to go through the major sourcing process that I go through. And then I guess, the last kind of rum that I've gotten really fascinated with in the last couple of years is the Clarence style rums, which are primarily, those are from Haiti. And I'm, interested in the fact that they take human scale to a whole different level. They're actually walking oxen around and hand pressing the cane. The cane is wild grown. It's not a cultivated crop. So they're going out and, cutting cane that's growing up in the ditches on the islands. It's really a different strain of sugarcane than I've ever tasted anywhere else. So, so much interesting stuff going on about what sugarcane contributes to rum. But that's the main meat of what I wanted to talk about today. And I'm looking forward to being present when folks are seeing this video and answering some questions in person.